The Seven Wonders of Sassafras Springs. Chapter 6. Day 5. Into the Woods. Whatever happened the night before, Aunt Pretty was chipper the next morning as we made our way down to church. I half expected to see a faceless fellow wearing long johns or a table all laid out for dinner as we passed through the graveyard, but all I saw were butterflies flitting around the tombstones, especially the one with the purple and pink flowers all around it. I squinted my eyes. Mary Hayes Fitzgerald, the marker read. I should have known it. Some of the flowers were violets. During the service, when Calvin played Amazing Grace, I could hear that cloud of bugs buzzing towards Sassafras Springs. In Sunday school, I tried hard not to see Miss Zeldy in my mind. I decided to try picturing myself in Colorado, so when Miss Pritchard asked how big a mustard seed was, she caught me off guard. High as a mountain, I answered. She was surprised, but she said that was a general idea, that it grew big because of faith. Later, folks congregated outside to chat. Since they didn't work in their fields and gardens on the Sabbath, our neighbors weren't in a big hurry to go home. Neither was Aunt Pretty. I was itching to get our big Sunday dinner over with so I could round up a couple more wonders. After all, there'd be no chores until evening. With a whole day before me, I might be able to finish my entire list. My aunt was too busy chit-chatting with the other ladies to think about dinner. Paul was in the middle of a long conversation with Marvy Peavy, the mayor of Sassafras Springs. Suddenly, Reverend Carson grabbed a hold of me. Folks like to call him Parson Carson, but only behind his back. "What's this I hear about you looking for wonders?" he asked in his booming preacher's voice. "It's kind of a game," I explained. "Stick to the good book, Eben. You'll find all the signs and wonders you'll ever need in there." "Yes, sir," I answered. "That's good advice." I didn't have the nerve to suggest he preach on the theme of love thy neighbor, but some members of his congregation, like Orville Payne, could stand to hear it. Somebody else grabbed Parson Carson's attention, and I went looking for Jeb. I found him under the big maple tree, trying to keep his brothers and sisters from getting dirty. It was not an easy job. "I stopped by yesterday, but nobody was home," I told him. "I had to go see my cousins," he said. I figured. "I got a plan for Sunday dinner," said Jeb. "We'll go dig worms and sell them for bait on Monday, so's we can buy ourselves a root beer at the right time." "I want root beer," Flo whined. "Sounds tempting, but I've got something else to do," I told him. "I know. The wonders." Jeb sounded disappointed. "Maybe we can find one down at the creek." "Maybe," I said, but I didn't believe it. Still, looking for wonders could be a bit lonely, even with Sal along. "If we can ever get dinner over, I can look around some and still make it to the creek." I glanced over at Aunt Pretty, but she showed no sign of moving on. I decided to see if I could hurry her up. She was talking to Leslie Mole when I approached. "I got a hankering for your good fried chicken," I told my aunt. Flattery never hurts with her, as long as it's based on truth. Miss Mole poked her pointy face out from under the brim of her yellow sunbonnet. "Eben, I hear tell you've been paying visits around Sassafras Springs." "I just asking folks if they have something special to show me." "Miss Payne says Orville caught you snooping around. Of course, I'm sure you meant no harm." Aunt Pretty snorted. "Poor Almeda. Orville has plenty to hide, if you get my meaning." She brought a cupped hand to her mouth in a gesture that meant one thing: drinking. That habit was frowned upon by both the Baptist and the community churches, except for medicinal purposes. "I have nothing to hide," said Leslie. "Eben, if you want to see something special, come over and I'll show you my log cabin quilt. I was just a young woman when I won second place at the county fair with that quilt." "Yes, ma'am," I answered, even though everybody had a log cabin quilt somewhere. Aunt Pretty had two or three. "Well, Leslie, this boy looks hungry," Aunt Pretty said at last. "Guess I have to feed him." As we left the churchyard, Leslie called after me, "You come on over and see it, boy." After Aunt Pretty's big Sunday spread, Sal and I trudged back up Yellow Dog Road. Though my full stomach slowed me down a bit, I was feeling hopeful, until I heard footsteps running down the hill behind me. Without a doubt, Ray Ellen Hubble knew how to ruin a perfectly nice afternoon. "Are you ready for my wonderful now?" "No, I'm not." I took a firm tone with Ray Ellen. "Well, Junior Watkins' wonderful didn't pan out, did it?" Sassafras Springs didn't have a newspaper, and we didn't need one either with Ray Ellen poking her nose into everybody's business. "I may have to call the county sheriff and tell her you're making a nuisance of yourself," I told her. "Ha, ha, ha." Ray Ellen didn't sound the least bit scared. You don't have an idea of where to look, and I have a wonderful for you, so you might as well see it. I'm looking for wonders, and I'm looking alone. I set off down the road at a flat, fast clip. I knew she was behind me, but I didn't look back, not all the way down to town. On Sunday, what few businesses we had in Sassafras Springs were closed. Hiram used to keep the gas pumps open, but there wasn't enough traffic to make it worth his while. Sal and I crossed the county road and headed for the creek. Jeb was already there, fishing. I thought you were looking for wonders, he said. I thought you were going to dig worms. Jeb grinned. I already did. I got a bucket full, so I decided to do some fishing. I squatted down next to him. Better not let Parson Carson see you. The fish must know it's Sunday, said Jeb. I haven't even had a nibble. At least I don't have to look after the young'uns. Jeb's parents always gave Maggie and him Sunday afternoons off. Gee whiz, it's boiling hot. I lay back flat on the rock with my feet dangling in the cool creek water. I'm trying to ditch Ray Ellen, I explained, taking a quick look behind me. She was nowhere to be seen. But Maggie and another girl from school, Carrie, were wading through the water toward us. Maggie was scrawny as a stick, but us boys admired her because she was the only girl ever to win a watermelon seed splitting contest at the Sunday school picnic. Carrie was the teacher's pet, but she deserved to be since she never did a bad thing in her life. Coogie Jackson's got a wonder for you, said Maggie, waving her arms toward the woods. He wants you to come. Now. Coogie, short for Jacob Coogan, Jackson had a wonder. Now, that got my attention. Coogie was no ordinary boy. At 6, he ate a fly on a nickel bet and declared it tasted fine. At 8, he kissed a toad in exchange for a dish of ice cream. He said it tasted like chocolate, the toad and the ice cream both. At 9, Coogie ate a June bug on a dare. He rubbed his belly and said June bugs had more flavor and crunch than flies. He liked them both fine. Last year, Coogie Jackson ate some leaves for 2 bits and got poison ivy all through his throat and innards. They'd thought he'd die, but he managed to pull through. Barely. He ended up a little thinner, a little paler, and a lot hoarser than before. Some of us would try to rile him about it. Got a tickle in your throat, Coogie? We'd ask. Or, eat any good leaves lately? Coogie never got upset, but he didn't have anything for money after that either. Still, he had our respect. He knew things the rest of us would never know. That gave him power. I sat up straight. Is it true, Carrie? I asked, knowing she wouldn't ruin her reputation by lying. Carrie nodded. He told me himself. Come on, I'll show you. It was hard to pass up a summons from Coogie, and it was hard to pass up a wonder, except if it was from Ray Ellen. Jeb and I got up to follow the girls. Sal was already way ahead of us. There was nothing like a bridge over Liberty Creek, but there were spots where you could walk across the trail of fallen trees and big rocks to get to the other side. We followed the girls deep into the woods to a place I'd never been. Jeb and I'd tried to explore these woods a few times, but if the chiggers didn't discourage us, the poison ivy did. I wasn't happy about going over there, but like I said, Coogie had power. We stopped in a small clearing in front of an old abandoned outhouse, weathered to the color of ashes and looking like a gust of wind would knock it flat. There were inch-wide gaps in the splintering wood and a tangle of weeds wrapped around it. There was nothing unusual about an outhouse in Sassafras Springs. Most folks still thought a bathroom inside a house was unnecessary, expensive, maybe even unsanitary, though Aunt Pretty sighed a lot when she read about big city houses with indoor plumbing and wringer washers and ice boxes. This outhouse hadn't been used in a long, long time. What it was doing in the middle of nowhere was a puzzle. There was no house or even a shack in those woods, and you sure as shooting don't need an outhouse if you don't have folks living nearby. Deep in the woods, you don't need a bathroom at all. Are you funning me? I asked, trying to make my voice low and even like Pa's. Coogie stepped out from behind the back of the outhouse. He had hair on the color of cotton. If he wasn't a boy, you'd have thought he was a white-haired old man. Instead, he was a white-haired young man with pale skin and light blue eyes and almost white lashes. Albert Bowie stepped out from behind him like he was Coogie's shadow. What took you so long? Coogie asked in his husky voice. I hope you're not telling me this old outhouse is a wonder, I told him. Looks more like a calamity. You want to wonder or not? I might decide to go home if you're not interested. You better listen, said Albert. He's got a humdinger for you. I bit my tongue to keep from saying, who doesn't? I want to hear it, said Maggie, almost breathless. Me too, said Carrie. Nobody on earth, except maybe Pa, could have kept me from hearing that story, but I didn't want Cooey to know it. Only a few minutes, I warned him. Good enough, said Cookie. He pointed to a fallen tree nearby. Have a seat, and I'll tell you why this outhouse is a wonder of the world. Maggie, Carrie, and Jeb plopped down as they were told, but not me. I stood face to face with Cookie. How would you know? I asked. As much as I wanted to wonder, I was suspicious. My pa told me. Maybe you don't know it, but he didn't come from around here. He came all the way from Gladiola, Georgia. So what? I asked. After all, my pa's people came to Sassafras Springs by way of Virginia. Every family started somewhere else, except maybe the Indians. It's not where he came from that's important, said Cookie. It's how he come here. Do you want this dang wonder or not? It sounded like a challenge. I'm listening, I told him, but I still didn't sit down. Coogie Jackson's story. Flight from Georgia. It's my pa's story, but he don't tell it often because he figures no one would believe him. The truth is hard to swallow sometimes. Anyway, Gladiola is a good 500 miles from Sassafras Springs as the crow flies. Pa says even a crow couldn't get here in 10 minutes. That's exactly how long it took my pa to get here. They was the longest 10 minutes of his life. He come in this very outhouse. It may not look like much now, but it was the finest outhouse made by man. My grandpappy built it with his own two hands. Pa told me grandpappy said the devil himself couldn't knock this one over. See, there was a bunch of scallywags around Gladiola, family by the name of Pitt. They gave Pa a terrible time at school, gave everybody a terrible time. They scared the little girls and cheated at games and even tried to burn the school down. They ran roughshod over the whole county, tearing down fences so the cows would get loose, helping themselves to everybody's crops, and stealing the storekeeper blind. But their favorite trick of all was knocking over outhouses. You might say it was a hobby of theirs. They'd let a person get good and settled inside, then rush up and tip it over. It'd take a while for the victim to crawl out, but the yelling started right away. They did it to Grandpappy late one night, and he was madder than anything. He vowed that would never happen to him again, and he set to building a tip-proof outhouse. My pa says everybody thought he'd lost his mind. He let the crops go to seed and hammered on the dang thing night and day. He had a few failures and had to start over, but Paul says he was busting with pride when he finished. It was a two-seater with a window, so if there was mischief, Grandpappy could look out and see who the culprits were. He made Pa and his brothers try to tip it over. Harder, push harder, he yelled at them. Well, Pa was 16 and pretty strong, but that old outhouse wouldn't budge. Grandpappy said it was solid as a rock of ages. I don't know if those Pitts ever tried to tip it over, but if they did, they must have been disappointed. Anyway, Grandpappy and his family could sit in that outhouse with no worry of being tipped again. Then there came a scorcher of a day in August. The air got heavy and still. The sky had a sickly greenish color, and who ever heard of a green sky? Paul felt the call of nature and ducked inside the outhouse. He wasn't sitting there long when he heard what sounded like a train coming. It sounded like it was coming right for the outhouse. However, the train didn't even pass near their farm, much less Gladiola. As he pondered that thought, the outhouse started bumping and bouncing like a bucking bronco. He figured the Pitt family was back again. He held on tight to the seat and waited for the outhouse to tip over, but the banging and the shaking got worse. Just as Pa thought Judgment Day had come, the outhouse started spinning around like the merry-go-round at the county fair. He decided to look out the window and see how the Pitts could manage this. Was he surprised to see he was surrounded by fluffy white clouds? He wasn't on the ground no more. He was flying high, smack dab in the middle of a cyclone. He thought he was on his way to heaven, and he'd hoped he'd be able to stay there. So any little bad thing he'd ever done, a white lie here, a small mistake there, whirled through his mind as he twirled through the clouds. Next, a funny thing happened. The clouds parted, and Pa could look out the window and see what was under him. What he saw was pure amazing. Blue water as far as eye could see. It was the ocean, rolling right under him. Quick as a blink, he was looking down on castles. He must have been going over Spain or England. He spun around some more and saw those mountains with the snow on top, the Alpines. Before he knew it, he was over that big wall of China right next to the famous pyramids of India. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he was dreaming, and when he looked down, he was over a big old desert somewhere, and whoosh! He was gazing down at the blue waters again. He spun around faster and higher, and you know what? He was whirling over ice and snow in all directions. There was the North Pole with Santa Claus waving at him. Pa didn't have a chance to wave back. because he twirled his way straight down along a big river that was so muddy it had to be the Mississippi. He held on for dear life as the outhouse started jerking and jolting, most shaking his teeth loose. Paul figured this was the end, and while he was preparing himself, the outhouse dropped straight down and hit the ground like a load of bricks. Paul says it got real silent, real quiet. Quiet as snow falling. Quiet as, well, dead quiet. It took a while for him to get up the courage to look out the window. He dang sure don't know what to expect. But he took a deep breath and looked out and saw this. He had landed on this actual spot, all the way from Gladiola, Georgia, clear across the world to Sassafras by way of one of the biggest, baddest cyclones to hit the country. He was stunned at first. Shucks, who wouldn't be? He wandered outside, kind of ginger like. He stumbled his way across the creek to the general. Hiram's youth's father ran it back then. He called the preacher, who listened to the story and let my pa stay at his place for a while. Paul rode home and got a letter back saying that the cyclone had flattened the house, killing my grandpappy. Grandma and the other young'uns were all right, but they'd lost everything. Poor Grandpappy Jackson. If he'd built his house like he built his outhouse, he might still be alive today. And that's the story of this here wonder, the outhouse that flew around the world. I looked over at Jeb, Maggie, and Carrie. Their jaws were just about setting on the ground. I guess mine was too. I never heard such a story before. Albert stepped forward. You putting that down with your wonders? He asked. You got any proof? Albert and Coogie exchanged a quick look. I got proof, said Coogie. You go inside there. You'll see those two seats. And next to the window, my pa scribbled a map of what he saw, dated and signed it right there on the wall. My good sense made me hesitate. There's your proof waiting, said Albert, pointing at the door. Go on. So I went inside and the door slammed hard behind me. Right away, I noticed something wrong. There was one seat, not two. I turned to the window looking for some writing at a map. I realized I'd been about 1 second before that rickety, rackety, fallen down outhouse tipped on its side. I crashed down with it and lay there, listening to Coogie and Albert whooping and hollering outside, and Jeb and the girls giggling up a storm. I'd been had, and I should have known better. I was probably the only person in Sassafras Springs, except for Violet Rowan, who knew the Great Pyramid was in Egypt, not India, like he said. And that thing about Santa Claus waving, well, like I said, I'd been had. I crawled over to the window, which was way down low to the ground. Go eat some leaves, Coogie Jackson, I shouted. Go eat poison ivy. He kept on laughing, and I didn't blame him. Sal came up to the window, sniffing and whining, but I was in no hurry to get up. I stayed in there, thinking, until the light coming in through the windows started to fade. You can come out now, they're gone, I finally heard Jeb say. I crawled out through the window. That Coogie, I grumbled, brushing spider webs off my clothes. Sorry you got tricked, said Jeb. It was a good whooper, though, don't you think? Yes, but it wasn't a wonder. Jeb snickered. That thing about Santa Claus was good. I shook my head. Coogie Jackson would do or say anything. On my way home, I wondered how long it would take me to live the whole thing down. The girls had already told Ray Ellen, no doubt, and Albert wouldn't be shy about spreading the word. I was ready to hop a train to Colorado and never come back. Paul was heading out of the barn when I got back home. Find yourself a wonder? He asked. Nah, just some friends down at the creek. Pa, do you know about an old outhouse in the woods? Other side of the creek? I nodded. Built by a fellow, 20 years ago, said Paul. He was a squatter who pitched a tent in the woods and built that outhouse. Paul stared out at the barn with a faraway look in his eyes. He seemed like a nice enough fellow until Marvin Peavy found out he was stealing folks' horses and selling them over in Oak Grove. The fellow picked up his tent and left in a hurry, but he had to leave his outhouse behind. I can't believe it's still standing. It's not after today. Paul looked over at me, squinting his eyes. You in some kind of trouble? No, I was tricked, and tricked good by Coogie Jackson, and I'm never going to live it down, I said. Folks forget over time, Paul said after a long pause. I know some upstanding people who've lived down worse than that. I'm not going to tell you which ones, though. When we got to the porch, Aunt Pretty was sitting in her rocker, but for once, instead of crocheting, she was sewing with a needle and thread, and she wasn't darning socks either. What's that you're making? Paul asked. Well, a boy can't travel on a train in rags and tatters, can he? I'm making even a new shirt, and I'm going to take Grandpa's old trousers out of the trunk in the attic and cut them down too. Going to knit him up some shoes too? Paul asked with a twinkle in his eyes. Aunt Pretty chuckled. Could if I had a mind to do it. I was feeling confused. Aunt Pretty, I thought you didn't approve of me going. At first, I was vexed, I admit. Sometimes folks go away and don't come back. But I'm pleased for you to take a trip, even. I just had my concerns. You seem to have forgotten, Cole, that no one was too happy when Molly married Eli, him being a complete stranger she'd known for about a week. That was 20 years ago, Pa slapped at a mosquito. Guess he's no stranger to Molly any more. Aunt Pretty's needle darted in and out of the white cloth. Don't even know where those two live, she muttered. Might live in a tent for all we know. A tent would be nice and cool in summer. Pa gave me a wink. Yes, sir, I might try that sometime. A slight smile played across Aunt Pretty's lips. Maybe I'd better knit Eben a nice warm sweater, just in case. The conversation was getting under my skin. I haven't gotten Seven Wonders yet. I glanced at Pa. I just wasted a whole afternoon on a joke. Goodness gracious, you have 2 whole days left, said Aunt Pretty. Now stand up, let me see if this'll fit. She held the cloth up against my shoulders and said it fit just fine, but I had a strong suspicion I wasn't going anywhere. It was the first day I hadn't actually gotten a wonder, and I was feeling gun shy about showing myself in public again. I sat down on the front step, feeling downright sorry for myself. What good on earth were 4 wonders? I might as well have gone fishing for 4 days. Aunt Pretty put down her sewing and excused herself to put supper on the table. She stopped at the door and sniffed the air. Smells like rain's coming. High time, said Pa. After a while, the yard took on that purpley look it gets after the sun hits the horizon. Pa stretched inside, and I could tell he was getting ready to go out and do the milking, so I jumped up first and grabbed a lantern. Let me, Pa. I can handle it by myself. Pa looked surprised, but pleased. I was pleased too, since Mert and Mabel were probably the only 2 females in Sassafras Springs that hadn't heard about the outhouse yet. I was relaxing to the steady splashing of milk hitting the pail when I heard a rustling noise. Mert looked nervous, and Sal jumped up and ran to the barn door. Standing in the doorway was Trouble herself, Ray Ellen Hubble, carrying a raggedy old burlap bag. What are you doing here? My tone of voice made it clear I wasn't happy to see her. You need another wonderful, so I figured if you're not going to come with me, I'll bring it to you. She raised the burlap sack so I could see it. I sighed. Ray Ellen, I'm milking here. She perched herself on a hay bale and said, I can wait. Wait she did, for Mert was not a cow to be hurried, and neither was Mabel. Just about the time I was finished, Pa came out to take the milk buckets. He didn't seem surprised to see Ray Ellen there. He just said, Howdy, and told me he'd have Aunt Pretty hold my supper for me while I entertained my guests. I was about to say that guests were folks you actually invited, but I knew he'd get on me for being rude. Once he was gone, Ray Ellen slid off the hay bale and brought her sack over to me. Do you want to see my wonderful or not? It better be good, I warned her. Ray Ellen led me to the window, carefully opened the bag, and reached inside. It's a ship in a bottle. Ray Ellen's voice quivered. My Uncle Dutch gave it to me. I stared at the dusty bottle. The tiny ship inside didn't impress me much. I know how they do it, I bragged. They collapse the boat, stick it in the bottle, and pull it up again with a string. It's a trick, not a wonder. Even McAllister, are you as dumb as a post? This isn't some regular old ship in a bottle. This is a real ship with a cargo of pure and terrible evil. Ray Ellen's eyes widened as she paused. Now, are you going to write this down or not? Go on, I said, pulling out my tablet, but make it fast. Ray Ellen's story, Dark Seas. Uncle Dutch says in summer he'd watch the waves of corn in the cornfield, and all he could think about was the ocean and cool water and tropical breezes. As soon as he was old enough, he snuck out of the house and went east, looking for the sea and a job on a ship. He didn't know diddly about ships or sailing, so he had to tell a big fib to get a job as a cabin boy. He went on a great big ship, the SS Phantom of the Sea. A phantom is a ghost, you know. Anyway, the ship was heading for Africa. That's about as far away as you can go. Uncle Dutch says back in the cornfields he hadn't thought about seasickness and bad food and nasty sailors, and that's what he found there. But he liked the blue waves and the ocean breezes, and his belly got used to the ship rocking after a while. The big problem was the captain of the ship. His name was Captain Graves, and he was meaner than old Lady Ellis. She won't even let me take a shortcut through her orchard. Says I stole apples. Anyway, the captain. He kept all the good food and drink locked up for himself, while the crew half starved. He treated the sailors like dirt. Worse than dirt. Worse than you boys treat us girls. Uncle Dutch says he was skin and bones after a few weeks, and the whole crew was grumbling about Captain Graves. Well, they reached the tip of Africa, and they were supposed to go all the way around the Cape of something or other. Then the most awfulest terrible storm hit the SS Phantom of the Sea. The sailors were scared out of their wits, especially Uncle Dutch. The waves whooshed over the deck, lightning struck all around them. Finally, the first mate, he's the head sailor, knocked on the captain's door. Captain Graves was mad as all get out that somebody disturbed him, 'cause he'd been drinking his expensive liquor from France or some such place. The first mate told him the crew was scared and wanted to sail into a safe harbor for the night. They knew they were close to land. That mean captain cussed him with bad words, even real bad, so bad I can't say them. I'm afraid of nothing on heaven or earth, he said, and he slammed the door in the first mate's face. Bang! Uncle Dutch says he prayed for the storm to let up, but it got worse and worser. He hung on to the side of the ship for dear life, and all he could think about were the rows of corn waving in the hot sun. He swore if he ever got to land safely, he'd never set foot on a ship again. That's what he was thinking when a huge wave crashed on the deck and washed two sailors overboard right before his eyes. The crew sat down whatchamacallits, life preservers, to fish them out, but no one ever laid eyes on them again. The rest of the crew was wailing like ghosts, which Uncle Dutch says he thought they were soon going to be. So they went back to the captain's cabin, and the first mate knocked. This time the captain was roaring mad when he opened the door. His eyes were bloodshot, and his breath was hot. That's what he was thinking when a huge wave crashed against the deck and washed two sailors overboard right before his eyes. So they went back to the captain's cabin, and the first mate knocked. This time the captain was roaring mad when he opened the door. His eyes were bloodshot and his breath was hot. Bunch of quivering cowards, he called them, and said that all of them together didn't have the courage of one real man like him. God will not sink my ship. He wouldn't dare, he shouted. And you know, even it's not a good idea to dare the Lord. The sailors were fixing to gather down below and decide what to do. As they walked away from the cabin, they saw something coming toward them, glowing like a foxfire out in the piney woods. Oh, it was a horrible thing with fiery red eyes. It walked toward them. Then it walked right through them and on into the captain's cabin without bothering to open the door. It was a ghost, or maybe something even worse. Uncle Dutch says they could hear the captain talking, like he was having a conversation, but they could only hear one voice. I want no help. I need no help. Now get off my ship, the captain shouted. There were three gunshots. Pow, pow, pow. They heard a weird voice, like the wind howling. The ship is doomed, and you are doomed to remain on board for eternity. Uncle Dutch says that means forever and ever. The words gave my uncle an awful chill. The sailors broke down the door, and they were surprised as could be to see Captain Graves standing there with his pistol in one hand and an empty bottle in the other. It was this same bottle, even, and there was no one else in the room, not a sign of another living soul. There was a crash, boom, and the ship pitched over on its side. Uncle Dutch says he slid right out the little round window called the pothole and over the edge of the ship. The next thing he knew, he was in the water, hanging on to a piece of floating wood. After a while, the clouds lifted, and out popped a full moon with a big smiling face. The storm was over. Uncle Dutch says he doesn't know how long he floated. Sometime the next day, he reached land. He couldn't believe his good luck. He crawled on shore and looked around for other signs of life, but he never saw another sailor from that ship again. He spent the day there, and that afternoon he found something else that had floated on shore. It was this bottle, and inside was this ship, just like you see it now, with these letters on the side saying SS Phantom of the Sea. And you'd better believe that, Eben, or you'll be sorry. Uncle Dutch says he wandered for a while until he found a village. Some Englishmen helped him get a place on a ship coming back home. Since he got back, he's never so much as set foot in a canoe. He wouldn't even get in the bathtub. He says nothing makes him happier than a hot summer day. The drier, the better. He gave me this bottle because he said he never wanted the sight of it again. He told me to take special care of it. Don't ever break it, Ray Ellen, he said. I can't be responsible for what would happen if all that evil ever got out. Ray Ellen stopped talking long enough for me to figure out the story was over. It's a one of a kind wonderful, isn't it? She asked. It's a good story, I said, and it could be a wonder. I might get to go to Colorado yet. Colorado? Ray Ellen screeched. Well, what do I get? It's my story. What are you going to get me for it? I considered for a moment. I'll give you my pie on first day of school. At least then she wouldn't have to steal it. First week, she insisted. 5 whole days. I was in no mood to argue. First week, I agreed. And if I were you, Ray Ellen, I'd take real good care of that bottle, just in case. When we came outside again, it was dark, and Pa insisted on driving Ray Ellen home in the pickup. That was a wonder, because Pa wasn't one to waste gas. In fact, some folks didn't even know he had a truck. He used it so seldom. He made me ride along, but I don't think any of us said a word all the way to Hubble's place. I kept a close eye on that burlap sack. On the way back home, big fat raindrops started plopping on the windshield. Looks like your friend brought us luck, said Pa. I didn't believe that, but I was feeling pretty certain she brought me a genuine wonder.